Coal and natural gas are the two fossil fuels most associated with the generation of electricity. But oil or petroleum is the main fossil fuel used in transportation. In this presentation, we'll look at our consumption of oil. Transportation consumes about 28% of U.S. primary energy and produces about 34% of energy-related CO2 emissions. So this is a very important segment of our energy-consuming society. Oil is probably the most important fossil fuel in the United States. It's the main transportation fuel, and 39% of U.S. primary energy comes from oil. Furthermore, about 42% of U.S. energy-related CO2 emissions are from oil. So we'll look at oil quite carefully. We'll begin at looking at its origin. Oil originated 400 million years ago when tiny microscopic animals and plants fell to the bottom of the ocean floor and were then compressed. Additional sedimentary layers on top of these microscopic plant and animal bodies led to pressure and heating, which transformed this biological material into oil and natural gas. Very often natural gas is associated with oil. Oil deposits may be located underground or under the ocean floor. It's the job of the petroleum geologist to locate these deposits. Once located, an oil production company will bring that oil to the surface and then take the crude oil to a refinery where it can be processed. In the United States, we consume about 19 million barrels of oil a day, 19 MBD. This oil is transformed from crude oil into a variety of important products within a refinery. Although a refinery will produce a great number of products, the most important product produced within the refinery to most of us would be the gasoline that's produced as part of the refinery process. This cartoon of a refinery shows that from different points in the distillation column, important components of crude oil are taken out. These would include gasoline, jet fuel, LPG, diesel fuel, and other components. 1 barrel of crude oil will produce about 45 gallons of final product. About half of that is gasoline. About a quarter is heating oil and diesel fuel. And then there are a whole variety of other products. In the U.S., we consume about 6.8 billion barrels of oil per year. Much of this is in the form of energy products. As shown in this table, we consume about 134 billion gallons of gasoline, 73 billion gallons of diesel fuel, 29 billion gallons of jet fuel, and about 73 billion gallons of other petroleum products. So this is a huge amount of consumption. As we mentioned earlier, the United States uses about 18.5 million barrels per day of oil and produces a great deal of it here in the United States. But nevertheless, we import about 5.9 million barrels per day from other countries, much of this by ship. So together with domestic production and imported production, we come up with a total of about 18.5 million barrels per day. The price of crude oil is, of course, very important because it's the raw material for gasoline and other petroleum products. The price of crude oil now is about $50 a barrel. This is about half of what it was, or less than half of what it was just a couple of years ago. This is the reason why our gasoline prices are very low right now. Global oil consumption is about 91 million barrels a day, compared to U.S. oil consumption of about 18.5 million barrels a day. So on a per capita basis, the United States is a very large oil consumer. And even on an absolute basis, we're a very large oil consumer. Nevertheless, other countries, particularly underdeveloped countries such as India and China, are beginning to also consume a great deal of oil. In the United States, we use about half of oil for U.S. cars and light trucks. The U.S. population is about 315 million. We have about 210 million drivers. Each driver drives about 15,000 miles a year, and we're driving in automobiles with fuel efficiency approximately equal to 23 miles a gallon. The combustion of gasoline leads to the emission of a number of pollutants. We'll look at that later in the course, and to emission of CO2. So simply by driving a car, you're in the process of causing the emission of CO2, a greenhouse gas, into the environment. In the U.S., the average driver like you or I uses about 650 gallons of gasoline per year. This costs at $2 a gallon, costs about $1,300. But the impact on the environment can be quite large, even from an individual. There's about 5.9, roughly 6 tons of CO2 emitted into the environment, and also a fair amount of pollution. Now, globally, the impact of this technology can be major. So remember the IPAT equation. The impact on the environment is proportional to the product of the population, the affluence of that population, and the technology that that population uses. So as more and more people globally use automobiles, that's the technology, T, because they're more affluent and they buy bigger, less efficient automobiles, and they use them more, and there's more people doing this, there's a greater impact on the environment because there's more gasoline consumption in this particular case. So we'll be looking in this course at this effect that more and more people are using a particular technology, in this case, a fairly impactful technology, gasoline engines, will cause a major impact on the environment.